Good evening.
Good evening, Miss Felice.
Miss Greene, I'm gonna miss you tonight, sitting next to you. You're gonna be too far away.
I'm so sorry. We'll get there one day.
Good evening.
Good evening, Miss Maida.
How are you all?
Good. Good
Hello.
evening. Matthew, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you. Good evening, Madam President. It's 6:01. I've started the recording.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Walker.
You have to turn your mic on, Mr. Walker. Yep, you're on now, sir. Nope.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's have a few seconds for a moment of meditation. Thank you.
Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Miss Burton, Miss Greene,
Here.
Dr. Henderson,
Here.
Mr. Howard,
Here.
Mr. Levenstein,
Here.
Miss Maida,
Here.
Miss Mineo,
Here.
Mr. Stradar,
Here.
Mr. Walker.
Here.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose. Matter made confidential under FERPA, employment history of particular individuals, matters leading to the employment of particular individuals, collective bargaining under the Taylor Law, NTA, CSEA, NASA, and to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein, Ms. Maida,
Yes,
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stradar,
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
Yeah.
We will be back at 7 for the
Hi, Ms. Mineo. I've started up the recording again.
Are you sure? Do we have 5?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. And we're a little bit earlier than our 7 o'clock time. So we're going to start with our acting superintendent, Mr. Forget, who will remember that 7 o'clock we have to break and go to our hearing on the safety plan, the district-wide safety plan. So welcome, Mr. Forget. Let's go.
Thank you, Ms. Mineo. This evening, we are going to present to you an opening of schools update. So, Mr. Durante, if you could pull that up for us.
I have it up, Mr. Forget.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Can we go to the second slide, please? So we felt it really important for you to take a look at the attendance that we had for Thursday and Friday of last week. The attendance rates on Thursday overall was 80%. Our in-person was at 91%, and those students that were approved for virtual that were medically fragile were at 70%. On Friday, we achieved an 88% with in-person at 91% and the virtual at 86%. Pre-K was a major push for us, a lot of recruitment and a lot of effort on behalf of our pre-K principal, as well as our assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction at the elementary level, and our executive director of human resources, and our Director of Family and Community Education, Ms. Pam Peterson. I am very happy to tell you that we started with 425 pre-K students. We still have 116 scholars that we're waiting to place. And it looks like we're going to have a very solid year with pre-K and not have to worry about filling seats. So very successful with that. I think it's really important that there was a lot of press and there were a lot of concerns last week with regards to a situation that occurred at Newburgh Free Academy main campus. We took that extremely seriously. We researched that incident and we found it to be a situation that occurred during the second period in a specific situation where 2 students new to the building were going in a direction that they were kind of lost. They turned around and began to retreat to go a different direction, and it ended up in a bottleneck. Absolutely a concern. We monitored the progress throughout the day using surveillance cameras. We do have 2,500 students in that school and 2,500 students that have to transition in the halls. So we're really assessing very closely what's happening with the traffic flow of the students and making adjustments each day. We welcome the input from our families to alert us to things that are occurring. And again, when they alert us, we react immediately. And at this time, I'd like a couple of my team members to share with you a little bit about the pandemic intervention strategies that we have being put in place. So Mr. Baer, would you like to share a little bit?
Or just to reiterate what Mr. Forget said, we have been monitoring how our traffic flow is, our cafeterias. We are happy to report that in many cases we are at 6 feet, especially in the areas of eating and music. High school is still an area of progress. We have made some adaptations in current hallway, cafeteria. We've created a senior lounge in the Eagle's Nest to disperse, which turned out to be a large increase of 9th graders in our enrollment that we had to rearrange how we do our eating. I've been working with Mr. Tyndall, who has been providing me video surveillance as to how we're handling masking. I know there's sometimes pictures that might show a single student without a mask. I can happy to report that in all the surveillance we've been looking at, students are masking in all the buildings. I've had Caitlin in the cafeterias report the same thing. They sometimes need reminders to pull it up over their nose, and sometimes they come in without a mask. But we have been very good about keeping on top of that and being vigilant in the buildings, and the kids have been very cooperative. So we're very happy to report that. Mr. Forza, is there anything else you'd like me to cover at this point, or is it sufficient?
Quick update on the screening.
Sure. So today we implemented with the board resolution to screen staff who are unvaccinated. We had set up discrete testing in all of our buildings with our school nurses leading that process. So at this point, we've done what the board has asked us. We had a process that had to be put in place using our nurses, and it's working well. We are unpacking the Department of Health. They have an additional expectations of districts, and that's still being digested at the local level in terms of what testing, screening, and vaccinations may look like going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Velez, you want to share a little bit about ventilation?
I don't think he's on, so I will take that, Mr. Forza. And I just want to let you know that we did run 1 week prior all of our HVAC systems prior to reopening. We did also change out to the MERV 13 filters. We also have at least a minimum of 2 working windows in the classrooms that are secured with screens. We are also have a system where we are opening up the dampers before school starts. We are going to be working to improve to see if there's times that we can run our systems more frequently without risking the efficiency of them. Our cleaning and disinfecting protocols are being maintained. We have increased our number of staff for substitutes and cleaning, and we'll continue to monitor and increase as needed so that we notice that there is more need during the lunch times. If there's being more lunch periods and cleaning having to happen more quickly, we want to make sure that we're supporting that so that we're adhering to our COVID cleaning protocols.
Thank you, Dr. Spindler. And just to give you an update also, there was interim guidance provided for P12 education, and on pages 8, 9, and 10, it talks about ventilation, and it talks about isolation rooms and nurses' offices. We're approaching page 8, 9, and 10 of that particular document as an audit. So Dr. Spindler and Mr. Velez are using that as an audit, and we will be able to provide you with an update at the next board meeting as to how well we did with that. And we're pretty encouraged that we're going to have some really good news for you. Dr. Spindler, can you just go to the next slide and give us a quick update on transportation as we close this out?
Absolutely. So we had some delays, as we typically do during the start of the school year. Unfortunately, they were delayed more than we anticipated or really would like to have it due to the shortage of our transportation drivers and having to double up on bus runs and going back to pick up children. But the time or the delay, I should say, has improved. An hour and 40 minutes on Thursday. Friday, we were able to get it an hour and 20 minutes, and Monday, 50-minute delay. I do want to let the community know that the vendors do have some hiring strategies out there, but we are in competition with our neighboring districts for drivers. And our transportation vendors and our director are redistributing and realigning bus routes based on occupancy, just so that we can try to make our runs more efficient as best as we can with the situation that we're in.
And I just want to mention that tomorrow, the emergency drill, we received permission to do that either next week or the following week, because to release our students 15 minutes early when we're still trying to get the buses on time. And it's not the bus's fault, it's the situation we're in. Those contractors are working very hard, as well as the drivers. They're doing everything they possibly can. But once we get to a point where we're hitting the target of more on time, then we will do the emergency drill. But we will not be participating tomorrow, and we have authorization as not to do that, but to do it at a later date. That would conclude this item on reopening. Thank you, Madam President.
I know there are 2 questions. I know Mr. Howard and Ms. Greene have questions. So Mr. Howard, I'm going to call on you now. Ms. Greene, I'm going to call on you after we do the hearing, because that has to be done at 7 o'clock. So Mr. Howard, briefly, let's go.
No, Madam President, let Ms. Greene go, because I have a couple questions, and I'll go after the presentation.
So then, Ms. Greene, I know, can you do yours quickly, because we have 4 minutes.
I didn't have a question. I didn't
Okay.
raise my hand. I didn't have a question.
Okay, and so that's where we are. So we got to wait until 7 o'clock to do our hearing. Maybe I should go on and do. Oh, Mr. Stradar, do you have a quick question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So the ventilation equipment that's in the buildings, has the district purchased any new ventilation equipment or just upgraded the filters?
So as part of our EPC project, we actually were able to refurbish equipment and refurbish parts inside the units themselves. There weren't any units that were such disrepair that the whole entire unit needed to be replaced. And in spaces where, such as maybe some nurses suites or some spaces that don't have the unit, or some gym areas, we also did purchase some portable units to help with air circulation.
Mr. Levinstein, is your question a brief one?
Yes, very, very short. Of the
You're muted. You're muted. Try it again.
Sorry, on the 116 kids on pre-K that are on the wait list, is the expectation that they're going to be able to get a seat? And is it because someone may drop out or other seats will open up?
So I know we're looking to hire 2 additional teachers to fill those seats. Mrs. Moriarty, do you have additional information to share?
Sure, thank you. So we had 3 retirements in pre-K last year, teacher retirements. And at the time, this summer, we had very low enrollment. We were concerned that we wouldn't have enough students to enroll into those classes. And so we didn't want to hire until we knew we had the enrollment. So we have a new class opening tomorrow at GAMS, another potential class opening the following Monday. And if we still need, once we finish placing, we have some vacancies in Horizon, some vacancies currently with Head Start. And if still needed, then we'll open another section, the 3rd section at Gardnertown. So we do have a plan to be able to service all of those students based on where the openings are and based on students not showing up.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Howard, I promise to get back to you right after we do the hearing for the safety plan, okay? Okay, so Mr. McCoy, can we start like a minute early or should we wait 1 minute?
I would wait till 7 o'clock, ma'am.
Okay, you got it. So everybody take a nice deep breath. It's a very long minute. Mr. Forget, would you like to introduce who is going to be talking about our safety plan, please?
Thank you, Ms. Mineo. This evening, we have Mr. Matt Tyndall, our Director of Safety, who's going to present the district emergency plan for the 21-22 school year. Mr. Tyndall?
Thank you, Madam President, board members, and senior staff. Do we have the PowerPoint available?
It's up.
That's the PowerPoint, or is that the district plan?
This is the PowerPoint, I believe, sir.
Okay. All right, so this is my favorite time of the year, district safety plan time. Our district safety plan was brought in by the SAVE Act and signed into law in 2000, and it addresses all our school safety procedures and violent prevention measures. All right, next slide. All right, and it's going to guide our employees and creates a framework for how the buildings and how all the employees are going to interact and how we'll interact with law enforcement and emergency responders. So it's broken up into our policy, our background, our response protocols, our chain of commands, and our post-incident responses. And again, it's been posted up on our website for public review. Right now, we're having our hearing, and hopefully later on, we'll be adopting it. The board will be adopting it. Some updates from last year. This year, we will no longer have our CRO contract, Community Resource Officer contract with the City of Newburgh. This year, we will have a new Orange County Sheriff's School Safety Deputy contract. They have 3 sheriff's deputies who live in either the New Windsor or Newburgh area, who are all retired NYPD officers. I'm putting together right now, I'm trying to get biographies out so we can share their background information, their photos with the board, senior staff and administration, so they can do like a welcome aboard and get to know their background. We will continue to do a modified emergency lockdown and evacuation drills this year. And if you remember, earlier on, we had a inclusion of our public health emergency and communicable disease protocols that New York State required and was passed by the board earlier this year. And that was added and replaced what we had passed last year in our district-wide safety plan, which was our pandemic protocols. So this will replace that and provides more guidance on how we respond again to communicable diseases moving forward. And next slide. That might be it. No, let's see. That may be it, Madam President, and that's all I have.
Board members, are there any questions or comments on the district-wide safety plan? Thank you, Mr. Tyndall. And this is, oh, Mr. Howard, you do have a question? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Howard, and then we'll thank Mr. Tyndall.
You're on mute, Mr. Howard.
Mr. Howard, you're still on mute.
Hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Mr. Tyndall, I heard you mention that you had the SRO agreements is no longer going to be with the local police departments. It's going to be with the sheriff's department. Are any of the 3 officers of color?
Yes, 2. We have 2 out of the 3 are people of color.
Thank you. I think that's very important with the district, with the population that we have 80% kids of color. So thank you very much.
Mr. Stradar?
I'm sorry, it's not a question on this item.
Mr. Stradar, your question is on Mr. Forget's section?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I'll get back to you. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Do you have a question on the safety plan?
Yes, I do. I'm wondering if I'm calling them officers, have had any training with the juveniles.
Actually, yes, Mr. Walker, I have one of our female officers, which will be a different than what we're used to seeing, Officer Sparrow, well, Deputy Sparrow. She actually spent years as a youth officer and crime analyst before she retired. So we do have a wide experience in law enforcement dealing with youth. And as soon as I'm able to get all the bio information, I'll share it with the board.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question or a comment for Mr. Tyndall? Okay, we'll try again. Thank you, Mr. Tyndall. Have a nice evening. And this is in the finance section, the approval of this item, board members. Thank you. We're going to go back to Mr. Forget's section, and I'm going to ask Mr. Howard and then Mr. Stradar for their questions. Go ahead, Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Madam President. One question I had was in regards to transportation. So I was curious as to how parents are informed or made aware when their children are going to be 1, 2, 3 hours late. Are they informed in real time, or how does that take care of? Because I've heard so many complaints because of Facebook and the internet. It could be 1 complaint, 2 complaints, but when people continuously share information, it seems like a lot of complaints. A lot of people were complaining about waiting to 5:30, 6 o'clock for elementary kids to be brought home, and they were not made aware of why the lateness, what was going on. They were just sitting there in peril and losing their mind. So is there a protocol in place to inform parents when especially elementary age kids are going to be 2-3 hours late?
So, Mr. Howard, I believe, and I will verify this, that a robocall went out on Thursday upon understanding that the buses were going to be delayed to all the individuals in the district. But I will verify that that did occur. Dr. Spindler, I believe our Ms. Coyne also has a protocol in place.
Yes, and our transportation staff does not leave their post or the Board of Education until all buses have returned back to the bus garages and all students have been dropped off at home.
So walk me through this, because this is part of the complaints I've been getting. Kids are let off, they're let out early, they get on the buses on time, but because, I guess not on time, but delayed, and that route is going to take X amount of, normally takes an hour, now it's going to take 2 to 3 hours. So is each parent called individually on a bus that's going to start late or going to deliver late? Or do we make sure that we make contact with a person and not a voicemail?
Well, the students, if they're running late, it's because the bus hasn't arrived at the school yet. So the students are they're in their school buildings, and we definitely can tighten up the protocol. But school principals will sometimes reach out to the families. Sometimes teachers, individual teachers will reach out to families. We try our best to get individuals in person, and we don't want to leave a voicemail, but in the event we have to, we anticipate that parents will check their voicemails. But as we said earlier, we're planning on getting better at it and creating protocols for some unforeseen circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Before I get to you, Mr. Stradar, Ms. Moriarty, you have your hand up. Would you like to add something to that, please?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add that teachers have multiple apps such as Dojo and Remind that they communicate directly from the classroom with parents. So that was another way that parents were informed. The teachers were sending out messages through those apps to say, dismissal process is this many minutes behind. It's now this many minutes behind. Also, I know that some of the elementary schools sent their own robocalls on top of the one that came from the district office. It is hard to make those individual calls while you're trying to load buses and keep kids safe. And, you have the parents who are picking up and now want to pick up because they're worried and because buses have been delayed. So we can continue to work, as Dr. Spindler indicated, on the communication process, but there are multiple apps and ways that we can communicate.
Sorry,
muted.
Mr. Stradar, your hand is up.
Thank you, Madam President. So I do have a few questions, but the main question that I have is regarding the opening of schools. Who made the decision to not to have an option for remote learning for those parents that want to have remote learning because of several reasons? Who made that decision? Because I know we have a reopening committee, but I don't think that they met. Who made that call to do that? Because I know as a board, a few board members, I think, wanted to have input on it, but I don't think we did. We weren't allowed to vote on that. So who made that call?
So I believe that some dialogue was occurring over the summer, and there was I believe it was a task force meeting or a town hall meeting that Dr. Padilla held with members to discuss the reopening of schools. The conversation was to try to get all of the students in person for in-person live instruction. That was a goal that we had over the summer for all of our scholars. We understood that there were certain students that it may not be in the best interest of those students to attend school in person. And we offered a virtual option for them based on medically fragile. I can tell you that Mr. Baer, Mr. McLemore, and the medical director met and they reviewed that particular decision, and a rubric was created in conjunction with those 3 individuals to determine how to make the decision as to who would be classified as medically fragile and who would not. And at this point, that's where we are right now for a virtual option. And as I said, I believe it was in the last meeting or the special meeting we had, we're going to continue to monitor the infection rate, the positivity rates, and the 7-day average, and keep a close eye on how that's working, as well as the layered mitigation strategies that we have in place to ensure safety of our students and our faculty and our staff. And if we need to make a decision, we are in the process of finalizing plans. We will be meeting with the NTA shortly to talk about those plans, that if we have to revert to a virtual or a hybrid model, the district will be prepared to do so.
So you're saying that there was a task force that made that decision?
No, Mr. Stradar,
I'm sorry.
I was on that task force, and no, the option was never given for the task force to vote yes or no. No, that was, we were told this is what was going to happen
And they
By who?
by Dr. Padilla.
So the choice for virtual learning was made by Dr. Padilla without a task force or committee or anybody else, without even board input.
I believe the purpose of that town hall meeting was to gain insight and information. I'm sorry, Mr.
Just, to have, it's not everybody's able to go to town halls. I just think that with the Delta variant emerging more as time got closer to the beginning of school, I think it should have been an option for parents.
Green, I see your hand, but I have 2 other people that had their hand up first. So I'm going to go to Dr. Henderson, then to Mr. Howard, then to you. Okay. Go ahead, Dr. Henderson.
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, I think I just wanted to make a comment specifically regarding transportation. And I know that we have several challenges with our 3-tiered bus system, but we just have to do better for our scholars than an hour and 15 minutes late, an hour and 45 minutes late. I'm really asking and urging all staff to look at the policies and procedures regarding dismissal. And are we doing effectively? Are we doing efficiently? Are we causing backups within major roadways? Even for pickups for kids, it has been brutal early on in the school year. And it just seems like there's no staffing, there's no coordination, there's no people with radios directing traffic. It seems like the same old. And in order for things to get better, somebody actually has to make some action and do something about it, not just keep kicking the can down the road. Our students deserve better. They don't deserve to arrive home at 5:30 at night. So I really, really want to stress that, especially for the parents of the district who have been dealing with this and feel like there's no answers and nothing that gets done. So thank you very much. Please, I'm urging you to do better, think differently, think outside the box, figure out ways to get these kids in and out of schools efficiently and effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Thank you, Madam President. So, Mrs. Forza, my question is basically around the school day, understanding that there's only so many minutes, so many hours in a school day, and the learning time per class, I believe, is 44 minutes, somewhere around there. And with this new protocols in place of 6 feet distancing in the morning and the buses arriving sometimes not on time, I was just curious, has the protocol of distancing and also with checking and wanding at the doors in the morning, has that impacted the school day in regards to the amount of minutes that are given to each class for learning time?
I think at the secondary levels, it in the beginning of the day, it affected it a little bit. It's still affecting it a little bit at Maine, where we have a lot of students that are entering at that particular point. We are exploring that. I can tell you that we've had our security monitors as well as Mr. Tyndall evaluating the pickup and the drop-off locations There have been adjustments made, and I do believe, Mr. Howard, that things are definitely improving since Thursday. People are coming in. What we found was that there were an enormous number of parents who were bringing their students to school. We anticipated it being heavy, but it was very heavy on the number of parents that were dropping the students off. We were able to react to that on Friday and get a better traffic pattern in each of the schools. I know that it's improved greatly at Meadow Hill School. I observed that, and I was speaking with Mr. Prokosh about that. Anybody on the team want to talk a little bit about the schools that you've been observing, Dr. Spindler?
Yes, and we've also added some guards to help with crossing of the streets, particularly at Bales Gate, because we know that there's a backup with the cars there. We've also been in communication with our local law enforcement, who's going to help support us as well, because backing up impedes traffic in the whole city or the whole town. So we're coordinating our efforts with them as well. We are going to continue to take this feedback and continue to work as hard as we can. There's also been a call to the National Guards in other states such as Massachusetts, and our team was on our transportation vendors and director were on a call today. There is a driver shortage, unfortunately, across America, and in our region. As we know that there's been other school districts that had to close due to no transportation. We also have surveys that we've put out to parents to say, if you're going to opt out, please opt out until January. You have an opportunity to opt back in, just so that we can have a better handle on our situation.
Thank you.
Ms. Greene?
I just have a question once again about remote learning. Has the district ever considered sending out a survey, just like she mentioned a survey to parents? Has the district ever considered sending out a survey to see how many families would like remote learning? I'm just wondering how they are handling that, because there are quite a few parents or families that want it. Has the district decided to at least send out a survey to see how many parents or families want remote learning as an option?
That is something we can definitely consider. We will take that into consideration, Ms. Greene.
Thank you.
Before I get to you, Mr. Stradar, I'm gonna make two comments. One, I believe that there should be an option for parents for remote learning. I've been saying that for a long time, but I like Ms. Greene's suggestion about surveying parents to see how many. I'm wondering if you guys have a plan in place for a pivot, if necessary, to remote learning. And will that be shared with the board? And will there be a plan put in place just in case we have a lot of parents who do want remote learning for those remote learners? So I'd like to see that or hear about those plans, because I feel very strongly about both of those things.
So as I shared, conversations were started with the Newburgh Teachers Association as to what the model would look like. We will be discussing that, and that will be a topic in labor management at the September labor management meeting. So at the conclusion of that meeting, we can share with you our plans and our procedures that have been agreed upon between the Teachers Association and the district. We have been in discussion as to what that would look like if we had to pivot. Obviously, we have students that are currently quarantined and they are receiving remote instruction currently. So we were prepared to do that immediately upon quarantining, but there are different and varying levels of remote learning that we're exploring at this point. And we will be able to share with you what those models will look like at our next meeting. But we need to engage in further dialogue with the Newburgh Teachers Association.
Second, I really like the suggestion that Dr. Spindler was talking about, having the local police departments as well as other people to help on the opening days of school. I'd like to suggest that at our reorg meeting, that discussions for opening of school start then. Because doing it now is too late. The first day of school was kind of scary for parents and for kids. So I'd like to see us get everybody involved and have them help us out so that we can have a better experience for our little guys, and our big guys too. So maybe, during the reorg meeting or right after the reorg meeting, we should have a big discussion about reopen. It's not too early. But
So-
what I'm going to, go ahead.
So I agree with what you're saying, Ms. Maneo, and we've already had some conversations reflecting on the current reopening of last week and the beginning of this week. We have some things that we're going to recommend for next year with regards to ensuring that there are people available throughout the summer that can help to plan, organize, and coordinate so that orientations can occur throughout the summer, and that the transitions from each of the school levels, 5th to 6th, 8th to 9th, is a much more seamless and smooth transition. We're putting the plan together for next summer already while it's fresh in our minds and with what's worked and what hasn't.
Thank you. Mr. Stradar, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam President. So seeing the problem with the transportation, I have no faith in the transportation companies to solve this quickly. I can see this possibly being something that's going to continue on for months if we have every student going in person. If the board decided tonight to authorize virtual learning for those parents that want their students to have it, what does that do for the administration? Is that going to be a problem, or is that going to be a help?
Mr. Stradar, and that would be your decision with the board members. Whatever decision you make, we would have to make happen. It would take a little bit of time to make that happen. At this point in time, we really believe that in-person instruction is in the best interest of the students, where the teachers have an opportunity face-to-face to work with those students. But again, whatever we decide as a unit, we will make happen.
I'm going to call on Mrs. Maida.
Thank you. I too am very eager to hear about a plan in case of we decide about the option for remote. I mean, there's no question that we want the children in school, and it's proven that a recovery for kids is much better if they are there in person. But I think it's really important, and it seems to be the community feels it's important to have a plan too. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Walker.
Yes, hold on. Yes, I'm in favor of choices as well, but I do have, I think, 2 questions. The first is the task force that came together. Did they have a mission statement in which it was stated that they would vote on whether we would go back to remote learning or anything like that?
I don't believe so, Mr. Walker.
No,
At least-
sir.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, I think that could be the problem if there was no statement that the task force would come to such a agreement. Thank you.
Mr. Stradar.
Thank you, Madam President. So I can see that it would be difficult to happen right away as far as going to the virtual option for parents. But in light of what's happening with transportation, a lot of the students that are going to be sitting on buses for an hour and a half or getting home an hour and a half late every day for weeks at a time, possibly, it's going to discourage them from even wanting to go to school. So I think right now I would like to make a motion to have virtual learning as an option for parents and at the quickest possible rate that the administration can put it into place safely. So that's my motion.
Mr. Stradone, can I piggyback on what you just said?
Sure.
So can we ask Mr. Forget and his team in 2 weeks, because that's our new meeting, to come together with a plan for a virtual option? And I'll survey the board to see if they're in agreement. Is that okay with you?
I think we can't wait 2 weeks. If the board authorizes virtual and we only have a few parents that sign up for it, then we know that transportation is not going to be solved. So it's something, we can't wait 2 weeks. I don't think we can go 2 more weeks like this.
Okay, Mr. McCoy, I need help on what we do with Mr. Stradar's suggestion of a motion.
What I have written down as the motion is to have a remote option for parents that want it and have the administration put this plan into place as soon as possible.
So I need a second.
I second.
Okay, Mrs. Maida, do you have a question about that motion?
Well, I'm concerned about us defeating the purpose if we don't have a very good plan in place. If we vote it, I mean, I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, but I'm just worried because we need it to be very structured, I believe.
Mr. Howard?
Thank you, Madam President. I agree with what you said. I think that we should take the 2 weeks to our next meeting because it gives the central office opportunities and time to come up with a plan for a pivot. For us to vote tonight on a knee-jerk reaction and say immediately, we're putting ourselves possibly in the same position of having the virtual learning. I think that with giving them the 2 weeks till our next meeting, gives them an opportunity to come back with a plan to present to the board, and then we can make our decision then. I think that gives us enough time to really allow them to come up with a solid plan, because just saying we're going back virtual without a plan doesn't make sense.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, I see your hand, but I'm going to call on Mr. Forget first. Go ahead, Mr. Forget.
Yeah, I'm gonna request that you give us an opportunity to explore the different types of options. It may not be an all or nothing, but allow us to investigate what's in the best interest of all the students. There are pros and cons to everything. If you are asking us, which I have heard a few of you ask consistently over the past few weeks for us to consider this, if you as a board would really like a solid plan for us, I would respectfully ask for the time to put together that plan and present it within the next 2 weeks.
Riley, what's going on?
Mrs. Maida, mute yourself, please. I'm going to call on Mr. Walker, then I'll get to you, Mrs. Moriarty, and then to you, Mr. Stradar. Go ahead, Mr. Walker.
Yes, I agree with Mr. Forget and Mr. Howard. I would want to have some type of discussion about this. Even though I tend to be in favor of it, I want to have some kind of instruction so I can make sure I understand what the pros and cons are and not be rushed into a vote. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Moriarty, did you have something that you wanted to add? And then I'll get to you guys, Mr. Stradar and Mr. Howard.
I guess I had a question for clarity as we go and we create this plan. Is this a plan to offer virtual to mitigate transportation issues which are still sorting themselves out? Or is it a plan for a remote option for health and safety due to the COVID pandemic?
Mr. Stradar, you want to try to field that one?
All the above. I think at this point, there's hundreds of parents are, from what I've seen, are interested in having a remote option. It's not just for COVID. If you have students on buses for weeks at a time, getting home an hour and a half late, you're going to demoralize them. You're also taxing the whole system. And I don't think the transportation companies are able to handle this. So my motion was to authorize virtual learning at the quickest possible rate that the administration can put a plan together. Not tomorrow. I understand that. And I never said immediately. I said at the quickest rate possible that the administration could put a plan together so that the parents know now, if we vote tonight to approve, that there will be a remote option. Because if we wait 2 weeks from now, the parents still won't know whether there's going to be a remote option or not.
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Madam President. So I kind of disagree with Mr. Stradar just said. The parents will know that the board has suggested to central administration that you come up with a plan for some type of remote learning. Because are we talking about 100% remote? Are we talking about a hybrid version? Because I mean, in that conversation, which I think the board should be having, we got to understand virtual learning was not good for all students. And if you just put the option out there, virtual learning is available, we have to come with contingencies or something in place that will let people understand everyone is not going to be allowed to be virtual. If you did bad virtually last year, if virtual learning was not something that was good or that was effective for you, that option should not be available for that student this year. If we know that the students were failing miserably or fell behind miserably because of the virtual learning, why will we put that option back out there for them to take that again? I think with contingencies in place, with things in place that we can possibly do over the next couple of weeks where we can have conversations around who would be eligible for virtual learning, who would not be eligible for virtual learning, what would be the threshold for that we are making that decision on, i.e., what was the education situation with that scholar last year? What was the attendance with that scholar last year? Like if you didn't perform good virtually, why would we put that option out there for you? I'm not saying virtual should not be an option, or I'm not saying a hybrid version should not be an option, but it's something that should have conversation around so that we can discuss it and we can find out what the parameters will be when we allow such a thing to happen. And I think what Madam President said in regards to the 2 week on the 28th to have that conversation, it gives the central administration 2 weeks to try to come up with a plan to answer and have conversations around all those different questions that I just presented. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I'm going to dovetail on to what you said. I think there is also another component about after school sports and other kinds of activities and students that choose virtual. So there's a whole variety of things that need to be well thought out and planned. So Mr. Bear, I see your hand.
Madam President, I'd just like to say something before we
Go ahead.
I'm going to ask respectfully again for the time to put this together, for us to pull the data. It's not a one-size-fits-all educational model that's going to fit for every student when you're talking about moving to a virtual model. We need to take a look exactly like Mr. Howard said, who benefited from the virtual model and who didn't last year. And what are the expectations that we have for them? When you look at the first 2 days, if you look at the attendance rates, you'll see that the in-person attendance rates from the first 2 days of school were higher than the kids that were on virtual for the first 2 days of school. I can't give you the reason for that, but I can tell you I got to figure out why it was like that. And then we also have to take a look at last year. There are students that have resources that others don't. And we've got to be able to consider that we don't just say this is an option and be sure that it's in the best interest of the students based on the resources that they have or they don't. I am respectfully asking for time for us to consider a plan to bring back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Forza. Mr. Bear, you want to say something quickly?
I think Mr. Forza said it very well. I don't want to repeat, but I also want to point out that when we decide to go in person, not only look at the attendance, but in the UPK program, we have what 540 students who are ready, who want to be part of that program, knowing it's in person. You know, that was not the case during virtual. We did not have students attending. We had these little guys, 4 years old, sitting at home. We did not have that level of enrollment when we decided to go purely, well, we had to go purely virtual. We've looked at the faces of these kids. Last year, when we opened up in a hybrid model, there was a lot of tentative behavior. Students are enthusiastic, they're excited, they're learning. We took months to work out a plan to get ready for the start of the school year. It's not perfect yet, but it's improving. Dr. Spindler talked about the improvements in transportation. We've been able to maintain 6-foot social distance in key areas. These principals have worked tirelessly to get these buildings open and put contingency plans in place. And I just think I heard not one size fits all. I just think we need to be really careful in this decision because there's 11,700 students who are at stake here.
Where am I? Mr. Stradar.
I'm hearing everything that you're saying. I agree with Mr. Forget and Mr. Bear that all this stuff needs to be planned out. That's why months ago, I asked the board to be involved in the planning for reopening of schools and was told, no, the board doesn't get involved. Dr. Badia will handle this. We have waited months for plans and nothing is in place. There is no social distancing in the buildings. There is just transportation chaos. You wait 2 weeks and not every kid is going to be going for virtual. It's the parents' option in conjunction with the past virtual learning. Yes, not all kids can learn virtually. Not all kids have a good track record at that. But all that data was talked about months ago that was going to get compiled in preparation for reopening. Apparently that has not been done. So that's why I'm asking, vote tonight on authorizing the administration to prepare the plan and have it ready as soon as possible. That's all I'm asking.
Thank you. Mrs. Maida.
I'm not sure if this is appropriate, Madam President, but could we table this motion and have that plan in place at our next meeting? Or would that be appropriate?
I second that. I second, if that's in the motion, I second that.
Mr. McCoy, I got a motion and a motion to table and a second. Now we need a roll call?
Ms. Greene,
Are we voting or is she calling on me to ask a question?
I'm calling on you to vote yes or no on tabling the resolution.
No.
Dr. Henderson,
No to table.
Mr. Howard,
Yes, the table.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stradar,
No.
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
That has 5 votes to table.
Okay, now Mrs. Maida, would you like to make another, do we have to make a motion to put this into place so that Mr. Forget and his team can put together a plan for next meeting? So that means surveying parents, finding out who wants to be involved, and then having a plan in place. Does that, Mr. McCoy, does that need a motion?
Not quite sure if what you're trying to do. Mr. Shaw might have to get in here.
Mr. Shaw?
It sounds as if you're looking to have a plan in place. Administration is asking for time to consider what the plan might look like. And you will need to have a dialogue and an agreement from the unions in order to get there.
Okay.
So that's a very problematic proposition.
My question is, do we need a motion on that, or can we just give Mr. Forget that direction?
You could rely on his representation as to what he will be doing, such as surveying and reporting back with the understanding that there is a great interest in getting this done ASAP.
Okay. I see some hands, so hang on. Mrs. Maida, do you have another question? Okay. Mrs. Greene, you had your hand up from before.
I was just going to say, don't forget to include the survey, but I heard it, so my question was answered. I wanted to make sure that a survey will be conducted in order to see how many parents would prefer it.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Thank you, Madam President. No, I was just going to say that, and David just mentioned what I was going to mention. So this is something that's going to be involved, the NTA, the unions, negotiations. I mean, and something like that just can't be done at a knee-jerk reaction. I mean, this is going to be a lot of reports. We have to send the doodles out to the parents. We have to have discussion around virtual, around hybrid, around what it looks like, around who's going to be allowed to, who's not going to be allowed to, what's going to be the threshold that's going to be used for students that can do it and that cannot do it. And I think, but the biggest uphill climb, we have to understand that this is negotiated wording that we're talking about here. So we have to go back to the unions and have conversations, negotiations with them too. So for us to do that, overnight, it's not going to happen. So I think doing it and allowing central administration to know that we would like for this to come back to the board and they can make a presentation to the board and then we can vote on what that looks like. I think that's the best route to go.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
Yes. If we're talking about changing the present situation, would the changes have to be reported to the state? Would we have to wait for their verification?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that question. I'm sorry, Mr. Walker. Would we have to have
That's
our model approved?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Okay. So Mr. Forget, you have some direction on which way you need to go?
Yes, we will begin work on the plan as requested. And again, please understand, this isn't just our plan. This has to be negotiated at 3 different levels. So we will begin to prepare and to collect the data and the information. And the survey data takes time to come back. So, I understand the need and the pressure and the desire, but we will do the best we can, but I can't promise you a remote model at the next board meeting.
As close as possible. Okay. Mr. Forget, are you done with your section?
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes my items.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. Mr. McCoy, we're now at the section of the agenda for public discussion and comments on agenda items. So I'm sure that the person that's going to speak has referred to the regulations regarding discussion and comments. Would you like to introduce this person and welcome him into the Zoom?
Yeah, Mr. Ryan Lamar has signed up to speak on the district-wide safety plan. If you could just turn your camera on, Mr. Lamar, you'll be all set.
All right, Ryan Lamar, 78 Keats Drive, New Windsor. Let's first recognize the board has chosen a remote option for itself and is now safer than my son is at an FA while you make your plan. I don't know why the Board of Ed allows COVID to be framed in our district as looking for progress over perfection. We're looking for protection. COVID is a deadly disease. It's not a learning experience for leadership. Qualified leaders were supposed to do the work of logistical planning. This is hard, and I'm not sorry. As a parent and taxpayer, I expect them to. That's why they're paid 6 figures. On 9/9, I was one of the parents who called about the high school. I'd previously shared that at NFA orientation on 8/25, safety protocols were not followed. My son and wife subsequently found out they were exposed to an individual with COVID there. In school, my son gets no mask breaks outdoors, which is the only place it's safe to take one. When a student takes its mask off in the corner of a room, COVID aerosols don't know to stay out of that corner. An indoor mask break in an NFA crowded room is an opportunity for COVID to infect a child, as is unmasking in indoor cafeterias. My son is in 4 classes with 28 to 30 students. No social distancing is possible. The front of his one-piece desk meets the back of the desk in front of him, and all of the desks are arranged like that. My son was advised that he should try to not lean his head forward in his seat to attempt some kind of distancing. If social distancing in classrooms isn't done, NICEAD says layer other mitigations. So what are they? Mask wearing. In all the photos circulating the overcrowded NFA hallways, you can spy students without masks on. This is not being monitored in common areas. This was true for orientation as well. Ventilation? The district says the energy grant is taking care of upgrading ventilation. What I've learned is that a temperature control is being installed in some univents. Refurbishing isn't a ventilation upgrade. Why won't you at least purchase HEPA purifiers for our classrooms, as the Poughkeepsie School District has now joined New York City schools in doing? Testing. We meet all of the conditions for the regular testing that NICEAD recommends. So where is the testing? Contact tracing. The students who were remote last year have no ID. How are you checking to see that registered students enter the building? How are you contact tracing those hallways? You can't cohort with all the kids all over the high school, so that's out too. So what layers exactly do you have? A senior staff member shared that on September 9th, 50 students showed up to NFA that weren't scheduled. How do 50 students show up with no location? Isn't that one reason you delayed the start of school? The students either fit the school safely or they do not. We need transparency about the actual capacity for the school with students distanced properly and the number of students in the school. Parents deserve to know the distancing in their children's classrooms, and the Board of Ed should be told how many classrooms are not distanced by the teachers. They're the ones risking their necks, and they have a vested interest in the truth. Staffing. My son's Spanish class had no teacher and was unsupervised on the first day. It's against regulations to have students unsupervised, I believe. At a Newburgh Elementary School, there's an empty kindergarten classroom. The 2 other kindergarten classrooms are unable to distance. Why can't you hire a teacher for that empty classroom so they can distance those babies? A Board of Ed member recently asked if the schools needed more staffing. An honest answer would have been, we do not have enough teachers to properly social distance most of our students if they are all back in the building. Finally, there's the NFA halls. It's not just true that the halls that were congested body against body were an isolated incident. The halls have been like that every day. I noted the parsing in the email we received. Not extremely congested for an extended period of time. There are 9 periods in the high school, so that means students have a total of 50 minutes per day in overcrowded halls. The Delta variant infects in 10 seconds. This is a significant risk. I'm asking again for a remote option because that will make all of the kids safer. No one, I repeat, no one at any level of government, no one has told you you cannot offer a remote option. The choice was left to the districts. The superintendent answers to the Board of Education, which is elected by the people. The Board of Education has the power to offer a remote option. The shifting from remote to hybrid to all in should have been a Board of Ed vote. Why did you just cede that responsibility? No one can stop you. You are in charge. Vote in a remote option. Please see through agendas. My agenda is I want my kid not to get COVID. I frankly don't care what the trending opinion about remote learning held by education bureaucrats is at this time. After day 2, there were 2 in-building cases of COVID at NFA Maine during orientation and school. Watching as students and staff get sick as you wait for a number to make it meaningful enough to change something is a complete failure on the part of this district. We have enough senior staff on salary and enough money to develop plans to avoid this happening. Clearly, that did not happen, so you have to shift gears and think fast. I am not in contact with the Board of Education to vent or give you endless feedback. I don't want to be thanked and ignored. I am here to get you to act before it is too late. Thank you.
Mr. McCoy, is there anybody else signed up to speak?
No, ma'am, there's nobody else signed up to speak.
Thank you. We're going to move on to board committees. Policy Committee, Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Madam President. We met on September 9th. We had conversations around resolutions that are on the agenda tonight to be adopted. And we also took case of some of the curriculum committee items to be put on the agenda for this evening because they didn't have an opportunity to meet this evening, this month. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Library Committee, Mr. Stradar.
Thank you, Madam President. Library Committee met on September 9th, and we have 2 resolutions on the agenda tonight. We also have the director's report, which actually can be viewed on the link to the agenda for that meeting. And there's a lot of information there about past events and future events for the library. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stradar. We're going to move to Audit and Finance Committee, Mr. Levinstein.
Thank you, Madam President. So the Audit and Finance Committee met today at 4:45 p.m. We discussed the resolutions 10.1 through 10.12, which is on the finance agenda tonight. And in addition, we discussed the Audit Committee charter, the external auditor's update, the internal auditor's risk assessment, possible refinance of the district's 2019 EPC lease, and cybersecurity issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levinstein. We're going to move on to my section. I have items 6.1 and 6.2 as a consent agenda for your consideration tonight. Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Yes, Mr. Stradar?
Yes, the 6.2, please.
All right, we'll separate both of those items. Let's start with 6.1, please. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So move.
Second.
Questions or discussion on 6.1? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida.
Yeah.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stradar,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Green.
Yes.
Let's move on to item 6.2. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So move.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Stradar.
Thank you, Madam President. So we received an email from Mr. Ryan Lamar on September 12th that has a very good suggestion for a change in the wording of the policy regarding mask breaks. This sentence that talks about mask breaks should actually read, mask breaks will only be considered when the student is socially distanced in accordance with CDC, Department of Health, and New York State Ed social distancing requirements. It should actually only talk about where it should say daily opportunities for regular mask breaks will be given to all students when the student is socially distanced outdoors in accordance with CDC, Department of Health, and New York State Ed social distancing requirements. So the outdoor mask breaks should be the change in the wording of the policy. I would like to make a motion to make that change.
Mr. McCoy, I need some help on this one.
So you want to add outdoors? Is that what you're talking?
Well, can we just change the wording to say daily opportunities for regular mask breaks will be given to all students when the student is socially distanced outdoors in accordance with CDC, Department of Health, New York State Ed social distancing requirements. It's in an email from.
So basically, no mask breaks if you're indoors, if you're not socially distanced. Is that where you're
That's
going?
correct. Yeah, mask breaks has to be outdoors because there's no, unless you're sitting in a room by yourself, that indoor mask breaks don't make any sense.
Mr. Forget? You're muted, Mr. Forget.
Sorry about that. So I guess that was my question, Mr. Stradar. So if we were able to provide an opportunity for a student to be in a room alone, would that be something that you would consider? My concern is during times of inclement weather, there are certain individuals that may not be able to go outside for that particular break. I think to the greatest extent possible, perhaps we could give the opportunity for outdoors, but there are times when maybe we can accommodate that need indoors. And I think that option should still be available for certain students.
Yeah, if the room is ventilated properly and there's proper social distancing, I mean, I would think that would be fine. But to actually be in a room with 20 other students and, like Mr. Lamar said, being in a corner, it's not safe.
Dr. Roman, could you also provide the board with clarification that we received on pre-K napping?
Yes, according to the Department of Health, we were provided additional guidance for pre-K students that falls under the child care setting. Students in the pre-K setting during nap time are not required to wear masks. And so we were provided that guidance recently.
Okay. I'm going to call on Mr. Howard, and then we're going to get back to your recommendation to change, Mr. Stradar. Go ahead, Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Madam President. So if you remember at the policy committee meeting, when we talked about the masking, we had this discussion around items such as this. If we were going to make the mask mandatory, we said that we need to allow time for children to actually have a Mineo break or whatever you wanted to call it, but go outside, take off the mask, and we said that was going to be worked into this. I see that it's not worded in the policy. So when we say go outside, is it possible? Because one thing that's going on, this pandemic has changed everything. It's impacted everything that we do. And I don't want to interfere with the time that's used for teaching with the classrooms, but how do we find time to allow young people or allow scholars to go outside, take the mask off for a couple minutes, because it is definitely needed. I know when I wear the mask for an hour, it irritates me. So how do we find time? How does that look, Madam President, to allow children to be able to do that? Because it's definitely needed. And it's definitely something that we should try to find a way to make happen, because just sitting in there and not being able to take that mask off, it's torturous. It really is.
Okay, so I get what you're saying, Mr. Howard, and yes, everyone here is in agreement that the masks, the kids and the staff need mask breaks. So how do we reword, Mr. McCoy? Where are we at with amending that policy?
You currently have a motion on the floor. I don't have a second at this point, but it looks like the second paragraph on page 2 of 3. Mask breaks will only be considered when the student is socially distanced in accordance with the CDC, DOH, New York State socially distanced requirements. That's what it currently says. And I believe Mr. Stradar's motion is mask breaks will only be considered when the student is socially distanced indoors in accordance with CDC social distance requirements or outdoors. I mean, you want to add outdoors somewhere in that sentence. Is that what you're talking about?
Mr. Stradar?
Yeah, outdoors is the preferred method for mask breaks. I understand it would be very difficult to do, but to actually take a mask break when you're inside a room with 20 other students, it doesn't make scientific sense.
So let me just say, so if where it says you wanted to say mask breaks will only be considered when the student is outdoors, and to take out the whole is in accordance with the CDC stuff?
That's going to be hard to do in inclement weather.
Or outdoors and then indoors if they're socially distanced. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I actually like the wording from the email. It says daily opportunities for regular mask breaks will be given to all students when the student is socially distanced outdoors in accordance with CDC and social distancing requirements. And we could also put or indoors in a environment where they are isolated. I mean, it has to be. You can't have people in a room together and be taking a mask break. Doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
You could say, I'm going to take a mask break, and everyone takes their mask off inside a, quote, socially distanced classroom that's desk to desk. It doesn't make sense.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Yes, Madam President. I agree with the intent of the email. I agree that it needs to be done. But what does that look like, Madam President, in our classrooms? Are we going to make it mandatory for teachers to allow kids to go out, and it's going to interrupt the teaching in the classroom? How do we do this to make it work? It is a great idea. I agree with it. But how do we make it work within the structure of what we're doing in the buildings?
Mr. Forget?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Mr. Howard's saying. I think to the greatest extent possible, when we can provide supervision for the students to go outside for the mask break, we should allow that. But there are going to be times when we can't. So what is an appropriate environment within the building where we can provide an opportunity for the students to have a mask break while they're supervised? I think there needs to be a little bit of flexibility with that.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yeah, similar to that. I think the wording that was used almost says that it will be a required outside mask break. It's kind of leaning towards that, which I don't know if we want to have on there.
I tend to agree. I'm going to get back to you in a second, Mr. Stradar. I feel like there's so many variables here. What if it's raining? What if it's snowing? What if it's minus 10 degrees? Outside is not often possible because this summer it's either been 90 or raining. So, I I see that this fall is probably going to be very similar or even worse. So I think maybe we need to go back to the drawing board on this one for that sentence and make sure that it's not a mandatory mask break. I can't see it being a mandatory thing that every teacher is going to have to take their class outside for a certain amount of time for a mask break. Mr. Stradar.
Would it be possible to talk to the teachers to find out if there is a possibility of possibly shortening up breaking the class into 2 different segments and then having that 2 minutes? I don't know how you can do this. I realize it's going to be a problem, but the most important thing is the safety of the staff and the students. If you take a mask off in a room that's, you can say it's properly ventilated, it defeats the whole purpose of wearing the mask in the first place. So at what point do we say this is kind of crazy? I mean, this is the whole thing with masks, and we have too many kids in the class. That's the whole point of having a virtual option. You have too many kids. We're going to keep butting our heads up against this because we have too many kids, and the parents, not all the parents want them in there, but there's no option at this point. So the policy as is problematic for me.
Thank you. Mrs. Maida.
I also want to say, I think the teachers can be very innovative. I mean, they can think of a way to go outside for 30, a minute and a half and do something silly with little kids, and the kids don't even realize it's a break, a mass break. But so let's give them a little credit for this too. Thank you.
Mr. Forget.
Yeah, Madam President, if you don't mind, allow us to take this policy back to a little bit more investigation, maybe work with the epidemiologist from Orange County Department of Health and come back with a recommendation at the next meeting.
So I need a motion to table. Yes, Mr. McCoy?
Yeah, if you're going to change it, if you don't like what's up there, yes, you can table
it. Mr. Howard?
Yes, Madam President, I was going to suggest that too, bring it back to committee. But what I wanted to add to that, because of the situation with the mask and everything, and we can pray on decent weather till our next meeting. We're talking about September till our October meeting. Is it possible to put something in place in regards to the mask wearing, but send the policy back to committee to come back with a better version so that we can vote on as a new policy? Because if this resolution does not go through, what is the mask policy as is right now?
Mr. Forget?
I'm just asking.
You're muted, Mr. Forget.
For everyone else.
The other recommendation I would have is to allow us to create the regulation that we could put in place prior to the next board meeting that addresses some of your requests.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay. Is somebody going to table this motion?
The motion to table is on the floor, correct?
That's not correct.
Oh, I thought Ms. Maida put a motion to table.
Second.
Okay, motion to table.
Thank you. Ms. Maida?
Second.
Okay. Roll call to table.
Mr. Howard?
Yes, Madam President, that's motion to table with the regulation attached to it. Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Maida?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stradar?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Greene?
Yes.
Dr. Henderson?
Yes.
Okay, so now I'm going to change the agenda because I can. I'm going to open the floor to discussion. Last week, I polled the board, or actually Mr. McCoy polled the board about virtual meetings. Some members would like to speak about this item. Mr. Levinstein, I see your hand is up already. Would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. So I wrote this email on September 3rd when I found out that the board had decided to go to virtual meetings. So it goes as follows. Madam President, so what groups does the district say should come into our buildings as we convey the message that the district follows suggested mitigation guidance and is safe? Pre-K to fifth grade students with no vaccine yet, junior high school students, teachers, staff, administrators, central office, parents, vendors, construction workers. I am aware that the governor gave municipalities, including school districts, the ability to return to virtual meetings if they choose. Board members were polled to state their preference of either in-person or virtual meetings. I cast my preference for all to see for in-person meetings. I guess all others cast their preference only to the board clerk, and a majority chose virtual meetings. Time might have been a concern, but I believe this should have been an in-public discussion. I cannot imagine stating that 15,000 plus children and adults should come into district buildings and feel safe, but it is not safe enough for the 9 school board members. Limited seating, physical distancing, and masks that we require in buildings should be the standard for board and committee meetings. I have stated my desire for in-person meetings since employees came back into the building a year ago. If the plan is to go forward with virtual meetings, I would like to request a discussion about if board members who want in-person meetings can meet in a building with central office attendees and limited public attendees, and the meeting be broadcast like done recently with board members who choose logging on to the meetings virtually. As we observe Labor Day, this was a while ago I wrote this, let us keep in mind the holiday that was designed to pay tribute and honor to the contributions and achievements of the American worker. Respectfully, Mark Levinstein.
Thank you, Mr. Levinstein. Anybody else want to make a comment about public meetings? Mr. Stradar?
Thank you, Madam President. I agree with Mr. Levinstein that meetings for the board, I can understand committee meetings being virtual, but the board meetings, I think, should be in person because we're expecting the staff and the students to be in the buildings. And to me, to be at home and the only other people that are allowed to be at home are medically fragile students, it's kind of distasteful for me. So I voted to have in-person meetings, and I respected the board's wishes, and I'm home. But I do feel bad that we have staff and students in the buildings that have to wear masks for 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day, and are on buses for hours at a day as well. So I would like for this to be rethought at some point. I don't know when. Are we going to have this definitely until January 2022, or can this be revisited at any other point? Thank you.
Well, if somebody would like to make a motion, I have a motion ready if you want to hear it, because I know that a lot of the board members are feeling the way you guys are. They are. Mr. Levinstein, is your hand up because you have something to say?
Well, I was going to make a motion, but if you have one prepared to go forward, I will certainly listen to that.
Okay. Mr. McCoy, can you read what we put together?
Be it resolved, the Board of Education will conduct in-person board meetings provided in the event that the district pivots to virtual instruction for students due to the higher transmission rate of COVID-19, then the board meetings will be conducted virtually.
So that's kind of a hybrid of what you suggested, having in-person meetings and then virtual in the case that the numbers get bad or we have to pivot, according to whether we're having, problems in our area that the infection rate is very high. Mr. Howard.
Yes, Madam President. So that resolution, does that parallel the discussion around going back to either virtual or hybrid that we've tasked the central administration to come back come back to the board with? Or does that go towards the numbers being dictated by the numbers coming back of COVID related incidences in our district?
Mr. McCoy, can you read that part again, please?
Provided that in the event the district pivots to virtual instruction for students due to the high transmission rate of COVID-19, then the board meetings will be conducted virtually.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Howard?
It does and it doesn't. So is it saying that we'll be going back to face-to-face
Yes,
starting at our next meeting?
Yes,
I
sir.
think, yes.
That is what that's saying.
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Levinstein? You're muted, Mr. Levinstein.
I'm sorry. Okay, so to answer Mr. Howard's question, I think what's a little confusing is we have people virtual now, the medically fragile. So I believe that the wording is just when the whole district goes virtual. So I think that's what that means. And I'm not sure. Mr. Stradar's suggestion of committee meetings being virtual is different than the board meetings. Is that what are you just saying board meetings, Ms. Mineo, or are you including all committee meetings?
No, not me. This is up to the 9 of us. This is up to all of you.
Well, I'm good with, I mean, if you want to poll the board about number 1 board meetings and number 2 committee meetings, maybe separately, that is a reasonable way to go.
Okay, Mr. Walker?
Yes, being in the high risk category and being a board member, I wonder if we did go back to all to the open meetings, would there be any requirements about people entering the building? Like if it looked like the crowd was going to be too large, would security have the authority to say we're at capacity now? Would people have to show proof of vaccinations or submit to a temperature, anything like that?
Can I ask Mr. Shaw if he could help me with an answer to that one?
Yes. The general rule is that if students are going to be present in a building, that there would be masking and social distancing at board meetings. Otherwise, unless you have the virtual meetings, you would be meeting publicly and there would be other people. Now, there is an issue about social distancing and the size of the crowd and the size of the room. You can't turn people away from a public meeting, so you'd need a bigger meeting venue.
Mr. Walker, does that answer your questions?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Howard?
No, I was just going to ask, so does that mean that going forward, our meetings will not be held at the board? We will find alternative locations, is that correct?
That, I need help with that one. I don't even know what to say about that one. I think first we need to decide whether we're going to be public, in person or not. And then we've got to make that decision, I guess. So can I separate out those two things and poll the board about how you feel about board meetings and then committee meetings? How's that for a first step? Okay. All right. So I'm going to call on everybody, ask you how you feel about in-person board meetings only. Okay. Ms. Burton, are you? No, Ms. Burton. Ms. Greene?
No.
You want virtual?
I want virtual. I don't want in person.
Thank you. Dr. Henderson?
I would vote for virtual, not in person, for flexibility, as these meetings have taken a lot of time recently.
Mr. Howard?
I would say in person. If we got the kids in school, we got the teachers in school, I think that we should go. We should be in person, face to face.
Mr. Levinstein,
In person.
Mrs. Maida,
In person, as long as we can switch back if problem.
I say virtual, Mr. Stradar,
In person.
and Mr. Walker.
Virtual.
Okay, now that is a nice tied up 4-4. So what do we do now, Mr. McCoy?
You have to ask the attorney, ma'am.
Okay, Mr. Shaw.
I think that it would be based upon the call of the meeting. You don't have a quorum to have the in-person. You could call the meeting virtually. That would make sense pending a ninth vote, one way or the other.
That means that our next meeting will be virtual until we have another, we go and do another go round. That's in 2 weeks. So let's separate out committee meetings. How do you feel about committee meetings, in person or virtual? Mrs. Greene,
Virtual.
Dr. Henderson,
Virtual.
Mr. Howard,
In person, same thought.
Mr. Levinstein,
In person.
Mrs. Maida.
Virtual.
I say virtual, Mr. Stradar
Virtual.
and Mr. Walker.
Virtual.
Okay, so our committee meetings will be virtual, and we have a hold on our regular board meetings until our next meeting, when we have we can do this again and get 5 one way or another. Mr. Levinstein, I see your hand.
Yep, please, just a question for Mr. Shaw. So we were in person, and then there was this vote taken to move it out. Was that a binding vote? Was that a proper vote? I mean, because now we're doing a similar vote, and we're saying, well, we don't have enough, so we can't make it happen. But did that other vote, that consensus kind of preference vote by email, is that a legitimate way of changing what we were doing?
No, you cannot conduct a meeting through emails. So in my opinion, the issue is how are agendas set, how are meetings called. Usually it's done by the board president and the superintendent. And right now the status quo was virtual. And that's why my opinion was to leave it virtual pending the next voting with 9 votes.
Yeah, but you just said that the last vote that was done by email shouldn't count. That's where it was changed to virtual, right?
I don't know that the vote changed it. Who arranged for the meeting to be noticed this way is the legally operative question. Usually it's the president and the superintendent.
In other words, Mr. Levinstein, I could have made that decision unilaterally. And what I did was I asked Mr. McCoy to poll the board and see how everybody felt, because I wanted all of your input. And the input at that time was 5 for virtual.
Okay.
So as the president and with Mr. When we made the agenda, we decided that this was going to be virtual, getting the board's input. It wasn't a unilateral decision.
Okay.
Right?
I understand. Thank you.
So this is it's gonna stay virtual until we get another meeting and we have 5 to change it. Thank you. So that ends my section, which was a very nice long section. And we're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, Elementary, Mrs. Moriarty.
Thank you, Madam President. Elementary Curriculum and Instruction presents items 7.1 through 7.3 as the consent agenda items for your consideration.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Miss Maida,
Yes.
Miss Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stradar,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Miss Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes my items this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Moriarty. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, Mrs. Soto.
Good evening, Madam President. The Division of Curriculum and Instruction, secondary level, presents to you agenda items 8.1 and 8.2 for the board's consideration and consent.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Miss Maida,
Yes.
Miss Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stradar,
Yeah.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Miss Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes my items for this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Soto. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Exceptional Learners, Mr. Baer.
Thank you, Madam President. The Division of Exceptional Learners has one recommendation. It's the recommendations from the CSE and CPSE committees.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Miss Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stradar,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Miss Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Miss Maida.
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes my items.
Thank you, Mr. Baer. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Dr. Spindler.
Thank you, Madam President. I present to the board items 10.1 through 10.15 as a consent agenda for your consideration.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Mr. Stradar.
Thank you, Madam President. 10.2, 10.3, and 10.8.
Anyone else like to separate out anything else? Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion on all but 10.2, 3, and 8.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion on those items? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Stradar,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Miss Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Miss Maida,
Yes.
Miss Mineo.
Yes. We're going to move on to item 10.2. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Stradar.
I know years ago we had this discussion regarding putting cell phone tower at one of the schools. And it was pretty unanimous at the time that we were not going to have any of those cell phone towers on our school properties. Could someone explain the type of cell phone tower they're going to put up? Is it going to be a 5G tower? And how can we say that putting a cell phone tower on our property is beneficial to the education of our students?
Dr. Spindler?
Yes, there's a tower that already exists at NFA Maine. We're going to just be adding to be able to have wireless service connect to it. So this is not a new tower. Mr. Velez might be able to offer some more insight on that as well.
Mr. Velez?
Yes, like Dr. Spindler said, we currently have the tower in NFA with service that we use. This proposal is for a company to put their equipment on our tower. So it's not adding a tower, it's just adding equipment to the existing tower.
Is the existing tower have cell phone service on it from another company, like AT&T or any of these other companies?
I know we still have service there for Sprint, Nextel. I'll have to double check on that for you, Mr. Cerdone.
That is true, Mr. Velez.
And those services were in place for how many years? Like when did the services start?
I'd have to look. It's before, obviously, me assuming this position. So I'd have to look into, find out when those lease agreements, were presented.
And how much money is this going to bring into the district per year?
This is going to bring to the district $3,850 per month, with an increase, a percentage increase as indicated in the documents that you have. So $46,200 will be for the first year, as well as fixing a light on the tower to make us FCC compliant.
Thank you.
Mr. Howard, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam President. Cause I'm a lay person when it comes to this. So could someone tell me, does the cell phone towers, do they help with the connectivity of using a cell phone in the buildings or laptops? Does it help with the Wi-Fi? And also, you mentioned something that blew my mind. You said Nextel. Nextel has been gone. Why would they still have a tower on one of our buildings?
When Nextel was the company in the area, then they got purchased by Sprint. So the contract passed over to Sprint. Now Sprint is part of T-Mobile.
Okay, that makes sense. And
Thank
does it
you.
help with connectivity?
In speaking with the vendor, Singular Wireless, they did indicate to me that it should improve connectivity in the area.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Stradar?
Is there currently any 5G service on that tower? And will this new lease have 5G service?
Somebody put their hand up. No.
Go ahead, Dr. Spindler.
I have to look in the specifics of 5G service. It also though will help improve our emergency services throughout our community. That was another thing that we were interested in having the lease because it increases the connectivity to our EMTs, et cetera.
Mr. McCoy, I see you waving your hand at
Dr.
me.
Spindler just hit on it. We've been trying, this has been going back and forth for 3 years because the tower at Mount Beacon is the tower that comes across the river for the emergency responders. And as you know, if you're ever in that area of Fullerton Avenue, it's very bad reception. So they've been really trying to get us to put a tower there to help with the emergency response frequency.
Mr. Howard, do you have another question? Okay. I'd like to roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Walker. Ms. Greene.
Yes.
Dr. Henderson.
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein.
Yes.
Ms. Maida. Ms. Maida.
Yes.
Ms.
Sorry.
Mineo.
Yes.
Mr. Stradar.
Yes.
Mr. Walker is waving. Go ahead, Mr. Walker. You say yes? Okay.
Mr. Walker's a yes.
All right. We're going to move on to item 10.3. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second, anybody? Thank
Second.
you. Questions or discussion? Okay, roll call, Mr. Clerk. Oh, wait, Dr. Spindler, do you have a question or discussion? Go ahead.
Yes, I do have the company on standby, so I do want to answer Mr. Stradarin's question about 5G. And the answer is yes, it will be 5G.
Okay, so I guess we're up to roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Greene.
Yes.
Dr. Henderson.
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein.
Yes.
Ms. Maida.
Yes.
Ms. Mineo.
Yes.
Mr. Stradar.
Yes.
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
We're going to move on to item 10.8. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Stradar.
So this resolution is just for declaring lead agency. What exactly does that do as part of the process? Like, where are we in the process of the old Bonville school?
So once we declare, oh, sorry, may I speak, Madam
Oh,
President?
yes, please
Thank
do.
you. I apologize. Once if this resolution is accepted by the board, the next step is that the secra will be sent to the New York State, and then we have the opportunity to put it out for bid. And legal may be able to expand on that as well.
Mr. Stradar, you have another question?
Yes. So have they completed the survey, the boundary and topographic survey?
Yes, it is my understanding that they have.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, because I have not seen any utilities marked out for call out. So I would definitely love to see what that survey looks like if they have not painted out utilities. And I mean, I see no signs of survey being done out there.
The architectural firm is awaiting for the seeker, I think, before they're going to go to the next steps. And then I will keep you abreast of all of the steps to resolve the safety concern of the structure.
Madam
David,
President.
Mr. Shaw, go ahead.
Yes, I'd just like to clarify something. I believe that there is a mislabeling of this action. This is actually a type 2 action under secret that doesn't require any additional action.
What does that mean? I mean, I'm sorry, I thought I was muted.
I agree. Mr. Shaw, can you tell us that in like regular language, not in legal language?
Yes, the net effect of this is that there is no further requirement for secret review. This is an action that does not have a significant impact.
And what does that mean for this resolution?
It means the resolution is fine. The reference to the resolution as a declaration of lead agency is not necessary. It's just a type 2 negative declaration. Just saying that it was mislabeled in the introductory language to the resolution. None of the clauses, just where it says 10.8 resolution to declare lead agency. That isn't the true purpose of this resolution. This resolves the secret issues as not having a significant impact environmentally, inclusive of a negative declaration.
So what is your suggestion? Should we change that?
Point
Change
of
the
order, Madam President.
resolution?
There's
Yes, sir.
a typo under the subject line. The whereas be it resolved, all that is correct. So I'll fix the typo on the resolution subject, but the resolution language is correct.
Mr. Stradar.
So if we approve this resolution as written, the next step is for the architect to do exactly what?
Dr. Spandler.
Yep, the architect is going to have our hazmat consultant need to finalize the variance to take the building down as hazardous materials.
So if we approve this, are we approving to take the removal of the building?
Go ahead, Dr. Spindler.
We're approving to have the secret so that we can move forward with the demolition, yes.
So there's still another vote going to happen to remove the building.
No, there's going to be a vote to adopt for the resolution for the bid to demolish it. Mr. Shaw, unless I'm missing something.
That's correct.
Mr. Stradar, what is your question? I mean,
it
sounds like you're dancing around a question.
Well, I'm just wondering, when does it get to the point where we, as a board, discuss the pros and cons of removing a building that, to me, it's a historic building and can be repurposed? When do we have that discussion? Because I thought we were going to have that at some point, but it seems like this vote itself puts the next step into sending it out to bid, and basically once it's bid, it comes down.
I don't think we have a choice. Do we, Dr. Spindler?
No, this has been declared an emergency project.
Mr. Velez?
Yes, Mr. Trade the State Education Department contacted us in February this year after our fire inspection and asked us to either fix the building or demo the building. This building has been closed for at least 25 years. I started working here over 20 years ago, and it's already condemned. Over the last 20 years, we've been doing fire inspections, and the last 5 years, we cannot go inside of the building because the condition inside of the building. This year, when we did the fire inspection, I reported the results to the state. The state contacted the inspector in BOCES to come and do another inspection from the outside, and they told us now we had to demo the building. The building also we checked with SHPO, and it's not a building that qualifies as a historic building. We did this back in 2008, and we check again today. It's not registered as a historic building. The other problem with the building after 2008, when the board vote to demolish and then did a second vote not to demolish, is that the building, the way it is right now, there's no room to put a septic tank or to put water service because those services used to come from the Bonneville building across the street from our school. When we built the addition in the back of Bonneville School in 2008, the septic tanks for that building were removed to accommodate that building. Also, I'm sure that the board is aware that there's no a sewer line in this area. I have talked to the Tannen River several times to see if there's a plan to put a sewer in that area, and the answer has been no. People have contacted our board to buy the building several times, and after they go to the town to see if they can connect to sewer or get services, they come back and say they're not interested anymore. So the only way to fix this school building is to put a septic, and we don't have a place to put a septic. So the state has said to us that by the next fire inspection, we have to demo the building. I don't think we have much of a choice here. They told us we have to do it and remove it from our roster.
I'm going to ask everybody. Mr. Shaw, do you have a question? If not, put your hand
No.
down. Thank you. Dr. Spindler, no. All right, Mr. Velez, do you have anything else to say?
No.
All right, Mr. Stradar, go ahead.
I still believe the building can be renovated. You can pump sewer to the septic field at the back of Bonneville. It's not going to be easy, but the building can be refurbished. There is a historic significance to this building. The building was built, designed by a Rockefeller. Has the school district ever reached out to the Rockefeller family to see if they want to save one of the original Rockefeller's grandson's designs to see if they're willing to do that? This building is going to get torn down for additional parking space, which we've never done an additional parking analysis on the existing building. So we haven't determined what the cost of the demolition is going to be. That's going to be, I guess, part of the bid, but you have to have some idea how much this is going to cost to take down. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have any other questions on this item? Roll call on this item, please.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes, Matthew.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levenstein,
Yes.
Miss Maida,
Yes.
Miss Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stradar,
No.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Miss Greene.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes my items for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Spindler. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Mr. McLemore.
Thank you, Madam President. On the Human Resources agenda, I have items 11.1 through 11.16 for your consideration on tonight.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levenstein,
Yes.
Miss Maida,
Yes.
Miss Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stradar,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson.
Yes.
That concludes my items, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLemore. We're going to move on to the clerk of the board, Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the approval of the minutes from August 24th and August 30th.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stradar,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard.
Yes.
That concludes my items, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. We're now at the portion of the agenda for public discussion on non-agenda items. Mr. McCoy, do we have anybody that has signed up for non-agenda items?
No, ma'am, nobody has signed up.
Thank you. We're going to a second executive session. Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose: employment history of particular individuals and to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stradar,
Yes.
Mr. Walker, Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein.
Okay, we may be doing business when we return.